So, Tim, you noted in your article that some Christians might be a little bit confused because sometimes it seems that violence is a good thing. It's something that we are warranted in doing. You have made it abundantly clear in the past that you are not a pacifist.
Right.
I mean, like, what? So apparently, people call you the John Wick of Christian apologetics. Is that right?
Has somebody actually called you that?
Oh, I've been called Jason Statham of apologetics.
Jason Statham. Right.
No, I think Tim just gave himself that name. But like, okay, so you discussed in your article. So when is violence justified? Because obviously you would say in some cases it is.
Definitely. And it's not always an easy question to answer, but it seems to me that the best way to understand when a Christian or anybody else for that matter is justified in resorting to violence is only when violence is the most loving thing to do in that extreme situation at that moment. Now, so that response might seem kind of oxymoronic, right? Because it might be hard to think of instances in which violence is actually the most loving thing to do. But that's the point. Violence should be extremely rare. In my article, I quoted J.P. Moreland and Norm Geisler. They wrote, quote, "To permit murder when one could have prevented it is morally wrong. To allow a rape when one could have hindered it is an evil. To watch an act of cruelty to children without trying to intervene is morally inexcusable. In brief, not resisting evil is an evil of omission, and an evil of omission can be just as evil as an evil of commission. Any man who refuses to protect his wife and children against a violent intruder fails them morally," end quote. And I would add that they fail God morally as well. So if that's the case, then pacifism is wrong. You could say I'm committed to pacifism, that I hope for pacifism, but you better be willing and able. I would argue Christians should be ready to throw down, hoping that they never have to. And that's why I know Adam and Fox. I don't know about Scott. Have you done martial arts?
I did 2 weeks of boxing.
Hey, we'll count it.
Yeah.
I know that was always my philosophy. I'm practicing martial arts with the hopes that I'll never ever have to use it.
Right.
That's it. That's my philosophy.
Me too. That's why I train with.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I train with firearms too, hoping I never have to use them. But I'm pretty good at it. I like to say I'm good at violence. I never ever have to use it. But sometimes it's the most loving thing to do. In extreme and rare circumstances, it's the most loving thing to do. So if one really is loving their neighbor as Jesus commanded, then one ought to be willing, and get this, as a last resort, to violently defend their neighbor from evil. But why? Because you love your neighbor as yourself. It's all about love. So the key words to focus on there, my answer is love and last resort, right? If you're not doing it, and if say you've got a gun, if pulling that trigger is not the most loving thing to do in that instance, then you are wrong. And if it was, or if it wasn't the last resort, and it should always be the most loving thing. I would just argue that I'll back up a little bit, but does that make sense? Talking about love and last resort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you kind of even go on to spell out a couple of different cases in your article. So let's talk about those. So you discuss Dietrich Bonhoeffer's plan to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Obviously, the plan failed, and Bonhoeffer was murdered by the Nazis. But in that moment, his assassination attempt seemed to be noble. So you asked the following question: if it was noble for a Christian theologian to assassinate an end to the Nazi Holocaust, then why are the vast majority of Christians opposed to violence against Planned Parenthood workers that would lead to an end of the current Holocaust of abortion? So you have an example for Dr. George Tiller was a leading abortionist in America. He gained national attention as the medical director of Women's Healthcare Services, which was one of only 3 abortion clinics nationwide at the time, which provided late termination of pregnancy. On May 31st, 2009, Tiller was fatally shot in the head by an anti-abortion extremist while Tiller was, ironically, attending a church service. So Christians possess a justified belief that abortion is murder, and the abortion industry in America has been responsible for around 60 million murders, compared to Hitler's 6 million. So why is it noble in your case, in your idea, in your mind, to assassinate Hitler, but not to execute George Tiller?
Yeah, well, the answer is simple. It was not the last resort, and this is why police officers, not to mention civilians who have concealed carry licenses, are only supposed to use their firearms when they believe it is a last resort. And I know, at least as far as citizens go, they have to be able to show that it was a last resort. That there was no other way that either they were going to come out alive or somebody else was going to get out of there alive unless they pulled the trigger. So yeah, it's all about love and the last resort. And in the case of Hitler, it was the last resort. In the case of Tiller, it wasn't. You see, I mean, I do think America is the best nation to ever exist on the planet. Partly, and that when I say America is the best nation or the greatest nation to ever exist on the planet, that doesn't mean it's perfect. We're far from it. We can be so much better. It doesn't mean we're not filled with sin and so many other problems. But it is to say where else do you want to go? I mean, that's how scary it is when we're thinking about this country falling apart. Where else are you going to go that's any better than this place? I mean, it's hard to think of some, but I think we do live in a great nation that allows its citizens to peacefully advocate for change. And so, see the Constitution's First Amendment. But change might not always happen as fast as we'd like. But nevertheless, Americans enjoy the freedom of speech, and we can continually advocate for change. In fact, we've seen a change regarding the Holocaust of abortion because we have the freedom of speech to speak out against it and to educate people. And I think, so many apologists, and other theologians and pastors have done a good job, done a great job educating our culture today. And many people are beginning to see that the pro-choice movement is really on the wrong side of history. And, not to mention science and logic. Abortion is evil, and people are starting to see that. As far as I can't give you exact numbers right now, but I've seen the numbers and the percentages that the abortion rates are starting to slow for the first time since 1973. So we're seeing a peaceful change. I mentioned earlier, man, if anybody would be justified and taken to the streets and being violent to see change, it would be the pro-life people who sincerely believe, for good reason, that you're killing 60 million babies. Is it right, Adam, that 30% around that number is African-American babies?
Yeah, I think it's like 1/3 or something. Close to 1/3. It's African-American. Yeah.
I've heard that in New York, there are more Black babies aborted than born. I don't know if that's like, an exaggerated statistic, but that's what I've heard.
No, I want to say it's like, I think it was like 2 years ago that stat came out that that year there was more Black babies aborted than born.
So anyway, back to Tiller and Hitler. I said, bottom line, all peaceful options had not been exhausted regarding Tiller. When it came to Hitler, Bonhoeffer realized that violence was the only option remaining. And indeed, he was right. Although he failed in his attempt, America and company, they finished the job and defeated the Nazis by means of extreme violence. And indeed, if you think about it, it was the most loving option, really the only option available given the extreme circumstances at the time. And like I said, not only does this apply with Hitler, This line of thinking also applies to self-defense situations, and I've explained this in an article that I wrote called "Love Thy Neighbor and Pack Thy Heat" on freethinkingministries.com. So, I encourage you to see that.
Okay, so I have a thought about
Okay.
this. And it's this idea that, okay, people feel, and Adam, you